They say the deepest scars don't always bleed on the skin. They bleed in silence, hidden in the shadows of love turned sour. What happens when the person you trust most becomes the reason for your darkest nightmares? Tonight, we bring you 11 true horror stories of betrayal, where loyalty shattered, passion turned poisonous, and the cost of love was nothing less than terror. These are not just stories, they are warnings of how quickly devotion can twist into destruction. If you crave chilling tales that linger in your mind long after the lights go out, then you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe to Bleeding Walls, where every story pulls you deeper into the darkness you thought you'd never face. James Holloway had always believed his marriage was indestructible. He and Emily had been together for 12 years, a picture-perfect couple in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Fairbrook. To the outside world, they were the embodiment of stability and success. James worked as a financial consultant, while Emily was an English literature teacher at the local high school. They had 2 children, a beautiful house, and what appeared to be the kind of marriage everyone else envied. But beneath the polished surface, their relationship had been quietly eroding for years. James had noticed small changes first. Emily spending more time on her phone, locking it when she used to leave it lying around, coming home later than usual with half-baked excuses about grading papers or faculty meetings. He ignored it at first, convincing himself he was imagining things. After all, Emily was his wife. She loved him, didn't she? The truth, however, had a way of bleeding through cracks, no matter how hard one tried to ignore it. It all began one rainy evening in October. James had been working late, but when he returned home, Emily wasn't there. The children were asleep, and the house was unusually silent. As he went upstairs to change, he noticed Emily's laptop open on the dresser. She never left it open. A message notification blinked on the screen, and though he hesitated at first, something inside him snapped. He clicked. What he found was a thread of emails, but not ordinary ones. They were love letters, explicit, desperate, and filled with longing. Emily had been writing to someone she called C. The emails spoke of stolen moments, of hotel rooms, of the thrill of secrecy. Worst of all, she wrote about James, describing him as predictable, boring, and dead weight. James felt his chest tighten as if a knife had been driven through his heart, but anger soon replaced heartbreak. He copied the emails, printed them, and locked himself in his study, reading every word until the early hours of the morning. For days, James said nothing. He went through the motions of life with a chilling calm, watching Emily smile, cook, and tuck the kids into bed, all while knowing she was betraying him. The duality of it enraged him, the mask she wore so perfectly. But James was not a man who acted rashly. He was methodical, patient, and now, vengeful. He decided to play her game. Over the next few weeks, James began leaving anonymous notes in Emily's handbag, on her nightstand, and even slipped one into her car. They were vague at first. "I know what you're doing." Secrets have a way of surfacing. Love always leaves a stain. He never signed them. Emily began to unravel. At dinner, James noticed her hands trembling as she lifted her fork. At night, she tossed and turned, her phone clutched tightly under her pillow. He never confronted her directly, but he enjoyed watching her paranoia grow, feeding it with carefully timed gestures. One night, when she was showering, James replaced her mirror notes with a single line written in red ink. "Your lies will bleed through." Emily screamed when she saw it. But James acted concerned, playing the role of the clueless husband. "Maybe the kids were messing around," he suggested, feigning innocence. Emily said nothing, but the fear in her eyes told him she suspected something darker. The final breaking point came when James followed her. One Friday evening, Emily told him she was staying late at school. James waited until she left, then drove behind her, headlights off. She didn't go to the school. She drove to a run-down motel on the outskirts of town. James sat in his car, watching as she entered room 12. Minutes later, a man joined her. James never forgot the way they embraced, like two teenagers in forbidden love. He didn't confront them. Instead, he waited. 2 hours later, Emily returned home, her hair messy, her blouse buttoned wrong. James kissed her forehead when she walked through the door. "Rough day?" he asked softly. That night, while she slept, James wrote another letter. This one he left on her pillow. When Emily woke in the morning, she found it beside her. "I saw you, room 12. Motel Crestwood. Betrayal always leaves a trail. Soon, the truth will bury you." Emily's scream rattled the house. She accused James of planting the letter, but he denied it with such conviction that she doubted herself. Paranoia consumed her. She stopped eating, barely slept, and kept jumping at every sound in the house. Then the real horror began. James escalated his torment. He printed the emails and placed them inside sealed envelopes, mailing them to Emily at her school. He left one inside her classroom desk. He taped one to the inside of her windshield. Every time she thought she had destroyed the evidence, more appeared. And then, the blood. It started with small stains, a drop on the bedsheet, a smear on the bathroom mirror. Emily thought she was hallucinating at first, but the stains grew larger, darker. One night, she woke to find the word "liar" scrawled across the bedroom wall in what looked like blood. She panicked, sobbing uncontrollably. James, of course, pretended to be horrified. But in truth, it was all his doing. He had slaughtered small animals, draining them just enough to use their blood for his twisted messages. Emily became a shell of herself. The affair ended abruptly. James made sure of it by sending the lover a final letter. "She belongs to me. Stay away, or your blood will join hers." The man disappeared from Emily's life instantly. She never knew why, but James wasn't done. One stormy night, as lightning cracked across the sky, James revealed everything. He cornered Emily in the living room, the children asleep upstairs. His voice was calm, almost soothing as he laid the printed emails before her, one by one, like a judge delivering a final verdict. Emily broke down, begging for forgiveness, swearing she would change. But James only smiled. "You see," he whispered, "betrayal isn't something you come back from. It stains everything, and stains bleed." When Emily woke the next morning, she was tied to a chair in the basement. James stood over her, holding a razor blade and a bucket. His eyes glowed with a madness she had never seen before. The walls of the basement dripped crimson, not with paint, but with the blood James had collected over weeks. The smell was suffocating. Emily screamed, but James only pressed his finger to her lips. "Shh. You wrote letters of love to him," he said softly. "Now I'll write mine. In you." The neighborhood never saw Emily again. James told everyone she had left him for another man, abandoning her children. The police found no evidence to contradict his story. But in the quiet basement of the Holloway house, the walls seemed to weep, stained with secrets too dark to erase. And sometimes, late at night, James swore he could still hear Emily's screams echoing through the crimson-stained bricks. Mark Donovan never imagined his life would end up like this, hollow, bitter, and consumed by questions he could never answer. For 15 years, he had been married to Claire, a woman who seemed flawless in every way. She was beautiful, charismatic, and the kind of wife his friends envied. But perfection, Mark learned, can hide the darkest of flaws. They lived in an old Victorian house that had been in Mark's family for generations. The house was massive, with high ceilings, creaking staircases, and more rooms than the two of them could ever use. Claire often joked that the house was haunted, though Mark never entertained the idea. He knew the real ghosts of life weren't spirits, they were secrets. And Claire had plenty of those. The first signs were subtle, almost easy to ignore. Claire grew distant, spending hours locked in her study, claiming she was working on her art commissions. She began dressing differently, more carefully, more provocatively, when she claimed she was meeting friends. And then there were the late-night calls, muffled conversations Mark wasn't meant to hear. At first, Mark buried the suspicion deep down, convincing himself it was nothing. After all, Claire was his wife. She had stood beside him through thick and thin. But suspicion is like a splinter. Once lodged, it festers until it infects everything. One night, while Claire was in the shower, Mark checked her phone. The messages confirmed his worst fears, explicit texts, promises of secret meetings, a man saved under the name David, though Mark doubted that was his real name. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. He confronted her that night, his hands trembling with rage as he demanded answers. Claire didn't deny it. She didn't even cry. She simply stared at him coldly and said, "You are never enough, Mark." Those words haunted him more than the affair itself. For weeks, Mark lived in a fog of anger and despair. He considered leaving, but the thought of another man living in his house, sleeping in his bed, made his blood boil. He couldn't allow it, not in the home of his ancestors, not in the place that carried his family's legacy. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. The Donovan house had a hidden room, a secret chamber built beneath the floorboards of the East Wing. His great-grandfather had constructed it during Prohibition, a place to hide illegal liquor. Mark had discovered it as a child and used it as a hideout, but now he saw it in a different light. It would become a prison. One evening, when Claire returned from one of her so-called art gatherings, Mark confronted her again. She laughed in his face, mocking his anger, taunting him with details about her lover. The words stung like acid, but Mark remained calm. He had already made his plan. With a sudden movement, he struck her across the head with the butt of his revolver. Claire collapsed, unconscious. His heart pounded, not from guilt, but from a dark thrill that surged through his veins. When she woke, she was no longer in their bedroom. She was in the silent room. The chamber was cold, damp, and soundproofed by the thick stone walls. Only a single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering faintly. Chains rattled against the walls, where Mark had bolted them in advance. Claire's wrists were bound, her face pale with confusion and terror. "What is this?" she screamed, pulling against the chains. Mark knelt in front of her, his eyes burning with hatred. "This is where your lies end, Claire. This is where you'll stay until you understand what you've done." At first, Claire fought him with venom. She cursed him, spat in his face, demanded he release her. But as days turned into weeks, her defiance crumbled. Mark controlled everything, her food, her light, her very existence. He visited her daily, sometimes to speak, sometimes just to watch her squirm in silence. The silent room began to live up to its name. Claire's screams echoed, but no one outside could hear. She pleaded, wept, and begged for forgiveness. But Mark was merciless. He reminded her daily of her betrayal, reading aloud the texts she had written, forcing her to relive the filth she had chosen over him. He began to write on the walls, words like liar, traitor, slave. He painted them with her own blood, drawn from shallow cuts he inflicted with surgical precision. Each scar became a reminder, each drop of blood a letter in his growing masterpiece. Weeks passed. Claire grew weaker, her once vibrant spirit crushed under the weight of confinement. But Mark noticed something strange. The silent room seemed to take on a life of its own. At night, he heard whispers echoing from the walls, low, guttural voices that called his name. Sometimes, when he opened the door, he found the chains swinging violently as if someone, or something, had been pulling them. And Claire. Claire began speaking to shadows, her eyes wide with terror as she whispered to something only she could see. One evening, Mark entered to find words scrawled across the walls that he hadn't written. "Let her go." He froze. The letters were smeared in blood, but not hers. The blood was darker, thicker, and carried a stench that turned his stomach. Claire stared at him then, her face hollow, her eyes blackened with madness. "They don't want me anymore," she whispered. "They want you." Mark's blood ran cold. The house began to change. The air grew heavy, suffocating. At night, the sound of footsteps echoed through empty hallways. Doors creaked open on their own. And always, the whispers. Mark could barely sleep, tormented by voices that accused him, mocked him, drove him deeper into paranoia. One night he woke to find Claire standing over him, her chains dragging behind her. Her face was gaunt, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She smiled, a twisted, broken smile. "You thought you trapped me," she said softly, "but you trapped yourself." Before he could move, the shadows of the room seemed to come alive. Hands, cold, skeletal, inhuman, rose from the floorboards, wrapping around his limbs, dragging him down. Mark screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. The next morning, the Donovan house was silent. The neighbors noticed Claire walking out, calm and composed, as if nothing had happened. No one ever saw Mark again. The silent room remained hidden, buried beneath the east wing, but those who later bought the Donovan house swore they could hear muffled screams at night and sometimes faint scratching from beneath the floor. And on the walls of the basement, faint but unmistakable, one phrase remained etched in crimson: "Love always bleeds." Ethan Porter always believed honesty was the foundation of his marriage. For 17 years, he and his wife, Melissa, had built a life together. 2 children, a comfortable home, and what he thought was unwavering trust. Ethan was a builder by trade, specializing in designing glass conservatories and modern glass houses that wealthy clients demanded. To him, glass symbolized transparency. It reflected his own belief that nothing should be hidden in love. But Melissa thought differently. Ethan first noticed the signs of betrayal in subtle ways. Melissa had once been warm and attentive, eager to spend evenings talking over wine or sitting on the porch with him, but lately she seemed distant. Her laughter was reserved for her phone, her texts hidden from view. Her excuses multiplied: late yoga classes, girls' nights, and weekend art exhibits Ethan never saw proof of. One evening, while Melissa was in the shower, Ethan noticed her phone buzzing on the dresser. A message preview flashed. "Last night was perfect. Same time next week. I can't stop thinking about you." His stomach churned. He opened the phone with trembling hands, and what he saw gutted him. Dozens of messages, explicit pictures, and exchanges filled with a passion Melissa had long denied him. The man's name was Hunter, a local real estate agent Ethan had met once at a neighborhood barbecue. Ethan felt his world collapse. Every brick of trust, every layer of love he had poured into their marriage shattered in an instant. But instead of confronting her, he chose silence. He wanted proof. He wanted to see her fall into her own lies. So he built a trap. At the edge of their property was a small structure Ethan had been working on, a glass studio he planned to turn into an office. He had designed it meticulously, with reinforced tempered glass, one-way mirrors, and soundproofing. To Melissa, it was just another one of Ethan's passion projects. To Ethan, it became something far darker. One Friday night, when Melissa claimed she was going out with friends, Ethan followed her. He trailed her car through the rain-slick streets until she pulled into a hotel parking lot. From his truck, he watched as Hunter greeted her with a kiss that made Ethan's chest tighten with rage. They disappeared inside, arm in arm. Ethan didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply drove home in silence, his mind already calculating the next step. The following week, Ethan prepared the glass house. He installed heavy locks on the inside, sealed ventilation ducts, and placed hidden speakers behind the walls. He brought in cameras, tiny pinhole lenses embedded in the glass itself. From the outside, the house looked beautiful, modern, and harmless. But inside, it was a cage, and Melissa would be his first prisoner. The night of the trap was almost too easy. Melissa returned home late, smelling faintly of perfume Ethan didn't recognize. He played his part, pretending to be asleep. The next day, he suggested they spend the evening together in the new studio. "You haven't even seen the finished place," he told her. Suspicious at first, Melissa agreed. When she stepped inside, she marveled at the glass walls, the polished floor, the sleek furniture. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan smiled, locking the door behind her. That's when she realized. The windows weren't windows at all. They were mirrors, reflecting her image back at her but preventing her from seeing outside. The walls seemed to close in as Ethan pocketed the key. "What is this, Ethan?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "This," he said coldly, "is where we finally become honest." At first, Melissa raged. She screamed, pounded her fists against the glass, demanded release. Ethan sat outside, watching from the other side of the mirrored wall. He spoke to her through the hidden speakers, his voice echoing from all directions. "You lied to me," he whispered. "You betrayed everything we built. Now, you'll watch yourself for what you really are." He forced her to listen to recordings, her texts read aloud, her phone calls replayed. He displayed the photos she had sent Hunter, projecting them onto the glass walls around her. Everywhere she turned, her sins surrounded her. Days passed. Ethan delivered food through a small slot, just enough to keep her alive. Melissa begged, wept, and swore she would change, but Ethan only smiled bitterly. "Glass shows the truth, Melissa. No matter how you try to hide, it always reflects what you are." But soon, the glass house became more than just a prison. Strange things began to happen. At night, Ethan heard whispers echoing from the speakers, though they weren't his own recordings. When he checked the feed, he sometimes saw Melissa's reflection moving differently than she did. Delayed, distorted, almost independent. Melissa noticed it too. One night she screamed that her reflection was smiling at her even when she wasn't. Another time, she swore the glass turned crimson, dripping with something that looked like blood. Ethan brushed it off at first, thinking her mind was fracturing, but then he saw it himself. Standing outside, he watched as Melissa collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Behind her, in the reflection of the glass, another Melissa stood tall, smiling coldly, whispering words Ethan couldn't hear. He recoiled, heart racing. The glass wasn't just reflecting, it was showing something else, something darker. Over the following nights, the doppelganger grew bolder. Sometimes Ethan would see the reflection move when Melissa was still. Other times, the reflection would pound on the inside of the glass while Melissa cowered on the floor. One evening, Ethan entered the glass house to confront her. "What's happening here?" he demanded. Melissa looked up at him, her eyes hollow, her voice trembling. "It's not me you're punishing anymore. The glass, it's hungry." Suddenly, the reflection smiled. Not Melissa, but the thing inside the glass. Its lips moved, forming words Ethan couldn't deny. "Your turn." The glass walls shuddered violently. Ethan stumbled, the sound of cracking filling the air. Shards spider-webbed across the surface as the reflection pressed its hand against the wall. The glass gave way, and cold, jagged hands burst through, pulling Ethan inside. Melissa screamed as Ethan was dragged into the reflection, his body vanishing into the mirrored surface. For a brief moment, she saw his face staring back at her from inside the glass, his mouth open in a silent scream. Then it was gone. The glass house stood silent. When the police eventually searched the Porter property, they found the structure locked from the inside. Melissa was gone, vanished without a trace. The only thing left were the walls, mirrored surfaces stained faintly red, as though something had bled between the panes. Neighbors say the house still stands, abandoned, its glass walls reflecting the world outside. But at night, those who pass by claim they see figures inside, Melissa, Ethan, and something else, watching, waiting, pressing against the glass, as if begging to be freed. And if you stand too close, they say, you might see your own reflection smile, when you know you didn't. Daniel Whitaker loved his wife, Sophia, with a devotion that bordered on worship. From the moment he met her, he was drawn to her elegance, her soft laughter, her eyes that seemed to sparkle with secrets. They had been married for 11 years, and though their life together wasn't extravagant, Daniel worked tirelessly as a jeweler to give Sophia everything she wanted. His shop, Whitaker and Sons Jewelers, was small but reputable. Customers often remarked that Daniel's pieces carried a unique beauty, as if each gem whispered its own story. Sophia often wore his creations, a necklace here, a ring there, always telling friends, "My husband makes these with love." But behind her smile, Sophia was hiding more than Daniel ever imagined. It began with a necklace. Daniel had designed it for their 10th anniversary, a silver chain with a crimson ruby at its center, shaped like a drop of blood. He told her it symbolized his heart, captured forever in stone. Sophia gasped when he placed it around her neck, kissing him with a tenderness that almost convinced him of her loyalty. Almost. But soon after, Daniel noticed something strange. Sophia wore the necklace often, but not for him. She wore it when she went out. Late dinners, supposed art shows, or charity meetings. One evening, as he cleaned her jewelry box, he found smudges of makeup on the ruby, as if it had been kissed. Suspicion grew inside him. Late one night, after Sophia returned home claiming she'd been with a friend, Daniel followed her the next day. He watched as she drove to a downtown cafe, her ruby necklace catching the afternoon sun. There, she met a man. Younger, muscular, sharply dressed. Daniel's stomach churned as he saw Sophia lean across the table, laughing, touching the man's hand, her ruby necklace gleaming like a beacon of betrayal. For weeks, Daniel watched, his heartbreak festering into obsession. He followed them to hotels, saw them together in parking lots, and heard Sophia whispering on the phone when she thought he was asleep. His world cracked with every lie. And then, something inside him broke. One evening, Sophia came home late again, her lips swollen from kisses she thought Daniel wouldn't notice. He greeted her with calmness that unnerved her. "I've been working on something special," he said softly. "A new piece. I want you to wear it for me." He handed her a black velvet box. Inside lay another necklace, more elaborate, more beautiful than the ruby one. It was a silver choker, encrusted with tiny diamonds that shimmered like stars. At its center was a locket shaped like a heart. Sophia gasped. "It's stunning," she whispered. Daniel fastened it around her neck himself, his fingers brushing against her skin. He smiled warmly. "It's more than stunning. It's one of a kind." What she didn't know was that the necklace wasn't just jewelry, it was a trap. Daniel had built it with mechanisms hidden beneath the silver. Tiny needles embedded inside the clasp, ready to pierce skin if she tried to remove it. Inside the locket was a vial of mercury, rigged to release if tampered with. Sophia wore it proudly, parading it in front of her friends, her lover, unaware of the poison resting against her throat. But Daniel wasn't satisfied with just watching her wear it. He wanted her to suffer, to know. So he began leaving messages. One morning, Sophia woke to find her ruby necklace shattered on the kitchen counter, the stone cracked in half. Next to it was a note written in Daniel's steady hand. Every jewel breaks. Every lie shatters. Another time she found her clothes slashed in her closet, and scrawled across the mirror in red lipstick was, "The heart you wear is not yours." Sophia grew restless, paranoid. She began snapping at Daniel, accusing him of spying, but Daniel only smiled, pretending confusion. "You're imagining things, my love," he said softly. But the necklace tightened. At first, it was subtle, a faint pressure around her throat like a hand resting gently against her skin. But soon, it grew unbearable. She tugged at it one night, trying to unclasp it, and screamed as the hidden needles pricked her flesh. Tiny drops of blood trickled down her neck. Daniel rushed in, feigning concern. "Careful," he whispered. "Jewels can cut deeper than you think." Sophia's hands shook. She realized then that the necklace was more than just a gift. It was a prison. Over the next days, the pressure grew. At night, Sophia swore she could hear whispers coming from the locket. Daniel's voice, repeating words she couldn't bear to hear. Liar, betrayer, whore. She begged him to remove it, but Daniel refused, claiming it was fused, that only he could open it safely. Her lover grew impatient too. She confessed to him in whispers that she felt trapped, that the necklace was suffocating her. They planned to run away together, but before she could escape, Daniel struck. One stormy night, Sophia returned home to find the house dark. The ruby necklace she once cherished lay on the kitchen table, glowing faintly under the lightning flashes. She reached for it, trembling. Suddenly, the heart-shaped locket on her throat clicked open. A metallic hiss escaped, followed by a searing pain that spread through her veins. Sophia screamed, clawing at her neck, but the necklace burned into her flesh, the diamonds cutting like shards of ice. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his face calm, almost tender. "I gave you my heart," he whispered, "and you poisoned it. Now you'll wear your betrayal forever." She collapsed to the floor, gasping, her eyes wide with terror. Blood seeped from her neck as the silver fused into her skin, becoming part of her. Her final breath rattled as Daniel knelt beside her, stroking her hair. When the police arrived weeks later, after neighbors reported the stench, they found Sophia's body sitting upright in a chair, her face frozen in a grotesque scream. The necklace was still around her neck, fused into her flesh. The ruby one lay shattered at her feet. Daniel was gone. The jewelry shop was abandoned, the safes emptied, the workbenches silent. But in the display case, one item remained. A necklace identical to the one Sophia wore, its heart-shaped locket gleaming with crimson light. Locals whisper that anyone who tries to wear it hears the faint sound of a man's voice in their ear, whispering words of love twisted into hate. And if you listen closely enough, you can still hear Sophia's final screams, trapped inside the diamonds, echoing forever. Anthony Graves had always trusted his wife, Lillian, with the blind devotion of a man who believed love could conquer anything. They had been married for nearly 2 decades, raising 2 children and building a life in a quiet New England town. Anthony was a writer, though not a famous one, spending his days hunched over manuscripts in his study. Lillian, graceful and poised, had once been the muse for his stories, but Anthony hadn't written in years. Somewhere along the way, inspiration dried up, and so did the intimacy in their marriage. Lillian grew colder, distant. She made excuses to avoid his touch, retreated behind locked doors, and often disappeared for errands that stretched long into the evening. Anthony told himself it was just a phase, that marriages went through storms. But the silence in their home grew louder, and the gulf between them widened until it became a chasm. The discovery came by accident. One autumn afternoon, Anthony was rummaging through the attic for old manuscripts. Dust coated every box, and cobwebs clung to the rafters like skeletal fingers. As he pulled aside an old trunk, he noticed a small leather-bound diary tucked behind it. The cover was worn, the clasp broken. He opened it expecting to find one of his own forgotten notebooks. But it wasn't his. It was Lillian's. The first few pages were innocent enough. Grocery lists, reflections about the children, notes about friends. But then the entries shifted. They became passionate, fevered, filled with longing for a man named Marcus. Anthony's blood ran cold as he read. Descriptions of secret rendezvous, detailed accounts of nights in hotel rooms, confessions of lies told to keep Anthony unsuspecting. Lillian's handwriting was steady, almost proud, as if recording her betrayal gave her pleasure. But the most chilling part wasn't just the affair. It was how she described him. Anthony. She mocked his failures, his lack of ambition, his fading looks. She called him a burden, a ghost of the man she once loved. One passage seared into his brain. When Marcus holds me, I feel alive again. Anthony is like a shadow, always there, but never real. Sometimes I wonder if he even deserves to keep breathing. Anthony closed the diary with trembling hands. His heart pounded with rage, humiliation, and something darker, an urge he hadn't felt before. That night he said nothing. He kissed Lillian's cheek as she pretended to sleep, his eyes lingering on her face, memorizing every detail. The betrayal had awakened something inside him, something vengeful. And as a writer, he knew the best revenge was not swift. It was a story that unfolded slowly, with dread and inevitability. Over the next weeks, Anthony devised a plan. He began leaving pages of the diary around the house. At first, just one, placed on her vanity. When Lillian discovered it, her face drained of color. She rushed to hide it, unaware Anthony had more. Another appeared in the kitchen drawer, another slipped into her purse. She tried to confront him once, but he feigned ignorance, tilting his head with a confused smile. "Are you feeling all right, darling?" he asked softly, his eyes gleaming with hidden malice. Soon, she began unraveling. At night, Anthony read from the diary aloud while she lay awake, trembling. October 14th. Marcus kissed me in the rain. I thought of Anthony, alone at home, probably scribbling useless words no one will ever read. He recited the lines like scripture, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving hers. Lillian begged him to stop, but Anthony only smiled. "These are your words, my love. Don't you want to hear your truth?" The attic became his sanctuary. Each night he added to the diary, not with her handwriting, but his own. He mimicked her script perfectly, filling pages with darker thoughts. Sometimes I wish Anthony would just die so Marcus and I could be free. When Lillian found these entries, she panicked, insisting she never wrote them. Anthony raised an eyebrow, feigning shock. "But it's your diary. Who else could have written it?" Her protests sounded weaker each time. Then the noises began. At night, Lillian swore she heard footsteps in the attic. Slow, deliberate, pacing above their bedroom. Sometimes, she claimed she heard whispering, her own voice, reciting diary entries back to her. She refused to go upstairs, trembling whenever Anthony suggested they investigate together. Anthony, of course, knew the truth. He had hidden speakers in the attic, playing recordings of her own words that he had read aloud. The sound seeped through the floorboards, tormenting her. One night, she woke screaming, insisting she saw Marcus's reflection in the mirror, grinning at her with blood smeared across his face. Anthony comforted her, stroking her hair gently. "Maybe your guilt is haunting you," he whispered. Her sanity frayed. She stopped leaving the house, too afraid the diary would follow her. She refused to look in mirrors, claiming her reflection whispered accusations, and always she clutched at the necklace Marcus had given her, a cheap silver chain Anthony had noticed weeks earlier. That necklace became his final tool. One evening, as Lillian slept fitfully, Anthony slipped it from her neck and replaced it with another he had forged in his workshop. This one was lined with razor-thin edges on the clasp. If pulled too hard, it would tighten like a snare. When she woke, she noticed nothing, but Anthony knew the trap was set. Days later, when she tried to rip it off in one of her fits of paranoia, the necklace cut deep into her throat. Blood trickled down her chest as she screamed, clawing at it. Anthony rushed in, cradling her face tenderly as she gasped for air. "Shh," he whispered. "It's just another story, Lillian. You wrote the beginning, and now I'm writing the end." Her final breath rattled against his fingers. Anthony buried her in the attic, beneath the floorboards where the diary had been hidden. He sealed the space, locking away her body with the words of betrayal that had destroyed him. To the neighbors, he explained that Lillian had run away with her lover. "I suppose she wasn't happy," he said with a sad smile, playing the role of the abandoned husband. But at night, when Anthony sat at his desk, he swore he could hear scratching above him. Sometimes whispers drifted down through the ceiling. His wife's voice, repeating the words he had read aloud. "Anthony is a shadow. Sometimes I wonder if he even deserves to keep breathing." And in the attic, if you press your ear to the floor, you can still hear the faint sound of pages turning, as if the diary is writing itself. Matthew Caldwell never thought betrayal would come crashing into his life so violently. He was a quiet man, a librarian who lived by order and rules. His wife, Helena, was the opposite. Vibrant, charming, with a magnetic energy that drew people in. They had been married for 9 years, and though they lived modestly, Matthew thought they were happy. But happiness is often a veil that conceals rot beneath. The cracks began to show in small ways. Helena started going out late, claiming she was taking painting classes in the city. She came home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, her hair tousled, her cheeks flushed in ways Matthew hadn't seen in years. He wanted to believe her, to trust her, but one evening, as he reorganized her drawers, he found a receipt. A hotel room, paid in cash, under a name he didn't recognize. His stomach turned to ice. At first, he confronted her gently. Helena laughed, brushing him off. "Matthew, you're paranoid. You spend too much time in those dusty books. Not everything's a mystery to solve." But the more she laughed, the more his doubt twisted into anger. He began following her, and on a rainy Thursday night he saw the truth. She wasn't attending art classes. She wasn't painting. She was meeting a man, a tall, broad-shouldered stranger who embraced her outside the hotel before they disappeared inside. From the parking lot, Matthew stared at the red curtains drawn across their window, shadows moving behind them like a cruel play. That image seared into his mind, the red curtains framing betrayal. He drove home in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. He didn't cry, he didn't scream, but something inside him broke. The next day, he returned to the library with a purpose. Matthew had always been fascinated by old folklore, and he recalled a book he'd shelved years ago, Architectures of the Occult. Inside, he found diagrams of rooms designed not to keep people safe, but to trap spirits, to bind them. The idea struck him like lightning. If Helena wanted to betray him in secret rooms, then he would build one of his own. In the basement of their home, Matthew began his project. He cleared shelves, ripped down walls, and worked tirelessly at night while Helena slept upstairs. He draped crimson curtains along the walls, thick and heavy, just like the ones from the hotel. He painted the concrete floor with intricate designs copied from the book, symbols of entrapment, written in chalk and sealed with drops of his own blood. And in the center of the room, he placed a single chair. Helena noticed nothing, or pretended not to. She continued her classes, her laughter growing colder each day, but Matthew waited, his patience sharp as a blade. The trap was ready. One Friday evening, he invited her downstairs. "I've been working on something," he said with a calmness that made her hesitate. A surprise. For us. Helena followed him, suspicion flickering in her eyes. When she entered the basement, she froze. The room was bathed in the glow of a single lamp, the red curtains heavy against the walls, the strange symbols circling the chair. "What is this?" she whispered. Matthew's smile was thin. "It's a place for honesty." Before she could move, he shoved her into the chair and fastened the restraints. Helena screamed, struggling, but the ropes were strong. "You lie in hotel rooms," Matthew said softly, his face inches from hers. "Behind red curtains. You thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. And now, you'll confess here." At first, Helena spat venom at him. She denied everything, cursed him, laughed in his face. But Matthew was prepared. He placed a mirror before her, large and flawless, forcing her to stare at herself under the crimson glow. Then he began reading. Not from her diary, not from letters. Matthew had written his own confessions, forged in her handwriting. He held the pages to her face and read them aloud. Descriptions of her nights with her lover, every sordid detail dripping from his lips. Helena shrieked, insisting she never wrote them, but the mirror reflected her image, mouthing the words along with him. Her own reflection condemned her. Hours stretched into days. Matthew kept her locked in the red-curtained room, feeding her scraps, letting her sleep only when exhaustion crushed her. Each time she woke, the mirror was waiting, her reflection whispering accusations in the dark. Helena's mind began to crack. She claimed the curtains moved at night, shifting like living things. She swore the symbols on the floor glowed, pulsing like veins. And sometimes, when Matthew left her alone, she screamed that the reflection in the mirror wasn't hers, that it smiled when she didn't, whispered when her lips were still. Matthew saw it too. One night, as he entered the room, the reflection turned its head before Helena did, grinning at him with eyes black as coal. The whisper that followed wasn't hers. "You built this room for her, but it's yours now." The glass shattered, slicing Helena's skin. She wailed as blood streaked down her arms, but Matthew stood frozen, the words echoing in his skull. The curtains rippled as if stirred by an invisible wind. The symbols glowed brighter, and the ropes binding Helena tightened on their own. She begged him then, her voice ragged. "Matthew, please, I'll stop, I'll change. Let me go." But the room had already chosen. The curtains closed in, suffocating the space in crimson darkness. Helena's body convulsed, her reflection multiplying across every shard of glass. Dozens of her faces stared back, each one screaming a different word: liar, cheater, whore. And then, silence. When the curtains finally stilled, Helena was gone. Only the chair remained, slick with blood. Matthew stood trembling, his mind teetering between terror and triumph. The book had been right. The room was not just a prison, but a vessel. It had taken her, consumed her betrayal, left nothing but silence. For weeks after, Matthew lived alone in the house. He told neighbors Helena had left him, that she'd run off with another man. They pitied him, the quiet husband abandoned by his unfaithful wife. But in the basement, behind the red curtains, Helena remained. Her reflection never left the mirror, her face twisted in an eternal scream. Sometimes Matthew swore the curtains moved again, whispering with her voice. And though her body was gone, her presence lingered. One night, as Matthew sat in the chair where she had been bound, the curtains closed around him. The mirror lit up with her face, grinning this time, her lips mouthing the words he feared most. "Now it's your turn." The neighbors never saw Matthew again. The house was sold, but no one stayed long. Tenants complained of whispers from the basement, of red curtains fluttering though the air was still. And in the mirror that hung in the hall, some swore they saw a man's reflection staring back at them, a man bound in ropes, crimson curtains closing around him forever. David and Clarissa Hayes were the couple everyone envied. They had the perfect suburban home, the glittering social life, and a marriage that looked unshakable. At least, that's how it seemed from the outside. Inside their 4-bedroom home with a white picket fence, things were not as flawless as they appeared. David, a software engineer, worked long hours from home. Clarissa, a realtor, spent most of her time meeting clients, hosting open houses, and attending late-night networking events. For years, David ignored the unease that gnawed at him. He wanted to believe in her, to cling to the vision of the woman he'd fallen in love with. But late-night phone calls, muffled whispers, and messages left unanswered began to scrape at his nerves. It started with a sound. At 2 a.m., while sitting in his home office, David heard a faint ring. Not from his phone, not from the landline. They were silent. The sound seemed to seep through the walls, a distant vibration like an old rotary phone crying from another room. He searched the house, but the ringing always vanished before he reached its source. When he told Clarissa, she laughed. "You're stressed, David. You're always glued to those screens. You're probably imagining it." But David wasn't imagining. The sound came night after night, always at the same hour, growing louder, closer, until one evening he traced it to the master bedroom. Clarissa was asleep, her phone on the nightstand. He reached for it and froze. The screen glowed with an incoming call. The contact name read simply, "Him." His blood ran cold. The phone stopped ringing before he could answer. Clarissa stirred, half asleep, mumbling something he couldn't make out. David put the phone down, but his heart hammered in his chest. Who was him? The next morning, Clarissa acted as though nothing had happened, but David couldn't shake it. He started watching her more closely. When she thought he wasn't looking, she smiled at her phone. She excused herself to take client calls in the backyard. She stayed out later, returning with excuses that felt rehearsed. The betrayal was there, coiled like a snake, waiting for him to acknowledge it. One night, David pretended to sleep. Around 1:55 a.m., he heard it again, the phantom ringing. He opened his eyes and saw Clarissa slip out of bed, phone in hand. She tiptoed downstairs, and David followed in silence. In the kitchen, she whispered into the phone, her voice trembling with longing. "I miss you. I'll see you tomorrow. Yes, he suspects nothing." David's chest constricted, rage boiling inside him. He nearly confronted her then, but something stopped him. It wasn't enough to know she was cheating. He wanted her to feel what he felt, to be haunted by her own lies. That night, instead of sleeping, David searched through old boxes in the attic. He remembered his grandmother's stories of spirit lines, rituals where people could bind voices to objects, forcing whispers and sounds to torment the guilty. It had always sounded like superstition, but desperate men turned to desperate means. Among his grandmother's things, he found what he needed, a cracked, dust-covered rotary phone with a receiver yellowed by time. She had once called it the ghost phone, a relic from an era where voices clung to wires long after the living had stopped speaking. David carried it to the basement and set it on a small wooden table. He lit candles, recited fragments of prayers his grandmother used to chant, and placed one of Clarissa's earrings beside the phone to bind it to her. His voice trembled as he whispered into the receiver, "Let her lies call her. Let her betrayals answer." The air grew heavy, thick with a static hum. For a moment, David thought nothing had happened. But then the phone rang, loud, piercing. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The ritual was complete. The next night, Clarissa awoke to the sound of a phone ringing. She searched the bedroom, confused, holding her own cell phone in her hand, but it wasn't ringing. Still, the sound persisted, echoing through the house. "Do you hear that?" she asked David. He feigned sleep. The ringing continued for hours, driving her restless. By morning it had stopped, but Clarissa's eyes were bloodshot, her nerves raw. The following night, the ringing came again, this time closer, louder, echoing in every corner of the house. Clarissa wandered from room to room, clutching her phone, whispering, "Where is it? Why can't I find it?" David watched her unravel. Soon, the calls weren't just ringing. Clarissa began hearing whispers on the line, faint voices calling her name. Sometimes she swore she heard David's voice when he wasn't speaking, or the lover's voice when he wasn't there. She stopped sleeping. Her hair grew tangled. Her hands trembled constantly. And then the messages began. One morning, Clarissa opened her phone to find dozens of voicemails, her own voice, recorded in hushed, guilty tones. "I'll meet you at the motel. He doesn't know. I love you." Every secret she thought was hidden, played back to her in her own words. She confronted David, her face pale. "Someone's stalking me, recording me. David, you have to believe me." But David only tilted his head, feigning confusion. "Maybe you're stressed, imagining things." By the end of the week, Clarissa was frantic. She tried to leave the house, but each time she reached for the doorknob, the phone rang. Shrill, relentless. She couldn't escape it. One night, she begged David to make it stop. "Please," she sobbed, clutching his shirt. "The calls won't stop. I hear them even when the phone isn't ringing. They're in my head." David stroked her hair gently, whispering, "Then answer it." Clarissa looked at him, wide-eyed. "What?" "Answer the call," he said softly. "Maybe then it will stop." She hesitated, but when the ringing started again, deafening, shaking the walls, she broke. She grabbed her phone and pressed accept, though no call was displayed on the screen. David watched her freeze, her lips parted, eyes wide with horror. "What do you hear?" he asked calmly. Tears streamed down her face. It's me." Her voice cracked. "It's my voice. I'm screaming. I'm begging." She dropped the phone, trembling violently, but the sound didn't stop. David could hear it too now, her own voice echoing through the house, screaming in agony, begging for forgiveness, begging to be freed. Clarissa collapsed to the floor, covering her ears, but it didn't matter. The house had become the phone. The walls vibrated with her own betrayal, the ceilings buzzed with her secrets. By morning, she was gone. David found her lying in the living room, her eyes wide open, her mouth twisted in silent terror. Her phone lay beside her, the screen cracked, displaying one final message. "Call ended." The neighbors whispered that Clarissa had a breakdown, that the stress of her job had driven her mad. David played the part of the grieving husband perfectly, telling everyone how much he loved her, how sudden her decline had been. But at night, when the clock struck 2 a.m., the ringing returned. David sat in the basement, the old rotary phone before him, watching as the receiver lifted on its own. He smiled faintly as her voice bled through the static. "David, please, answer me." He never picked it up. The phone keeps ringing, and in the silence of his home, he finally feels at peace. Eleanor Price had always thought she understood marriage, love, loyalty, and compromise. Those were the pillars. When she married Thomas, a charming history professor, she believed she'd found the kind of man who respected vows. They built a quiet life together in a small New England town, their old Victorian home filled with antique furniture and shelves of Thomas's rare book collection. But cracks appeared slowly, like hairline fractures in glass. At first, it was the way Thomas stayed late at the university, grading papers until midnight. Then it was the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his jacket. Eleanor wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but her doubts deepened when she discovered the first letter. It was tucked between the pages of one of his old leather-bound journals, a crimson envelope sealed with wax. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The letter was passionate, intimate, written in a woman's delicate hand. "When you touch me, I forget the world exists. Tonight, meet me where the roses bleed." Eleanor felt her stomach twist. The words dripped with longing, with secrets. She searched Thomas's study and found more envelopes hidden between books, inside drawers, even beneath the floorboard beneath his desk. Each one was the same, written in red ink, signed only with the initial L. Her husband was having an affair, but it wasn't just betrayal that unsettled Eleanor. It was the strangeness of the letters themselves. The handwriting seemed old-fashioned, almost Victorian in style. The paper was thick, textured, as if it had aged for decades. Some of the letters even carried the faint scent of roses, though no fresh flowers were in the house. When Eleanor confronted Thomas, he didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at her with exhausted eyes. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he whispered. "But she's different. I can't stay away." "Who is she?" Eleanor demanded, her heart breaking. Thomas hesitated, his face pale. "Her name is Lillian." That night, Eleanor cried herself to sleep. But the more she thought about it, the more something didn't fit. Lillian had never called the house. She'd never shown up at their door. All Eleanor had were letters. Letters that looked like they belonged in a museum, not in the hands of a modern mistress. One evening, while Thomas was out working late, Eleanor lit candles in the study and spread the letters across the desk. She traced the handwriting, whispered the words, and wondered who this Lillian really was. That's when the whisper came. "You shouldn't have read them." Eleanor froze. The voice was faint, drifting through the room like a breeze. She turned, but the study was empty. Her heart pounded as she gathered the letters and shoved them back into the drawer. But she couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The following days grew stranger. At night, Eleanor heard soft footsteps in the hallway outside the bedroom. Sometimes she smelled roses, sharp and metallic, like flowers soaked in blood. Once she woke to find a crimson envelope resting on her pillow. The paper was warm to the touch, as though freshly written, but Thomas was asleep beside her. The letter inside chilled her to the bone. "You should not come between us. He belongs to me now." Eleanor confronted Thomas again, shoving the letter in his face. "She's threatening me now, Thomas." "Who is she really? Tell me the truth." But Thomas looked at her with trembling hands. "Eleanor, Lillian's been dead for over 100 years. He explained that the university archives contained a collection of letters from a woman named Lillian Harper, who lived in the late 1800s. She had been the secret lover of a married professor, and according to town legend, she died tragically in the very house Eleanor and Thomas now owned. "I found her letters years ago," Thomas admitted. I started reading them. Then one night I wrote back. I thought it was harmless, a silly game, but she answered. And once she answered, I couldn't stop." Eleanor stared at him in horror. "You're telling me you're having an affair with a ghost?" Thomas's silence was answer enough. That night, Eleanor burned the letters. She threw them into the fireplace, watching the crimson paper curl into ash. But as the last flame died, she heard a scream, a woman's voice shrieking in rage. The sound rattled the windows, shook the walls, and made Thomas fall to his knees. "You shouldn't have done that," he cried. "She'll never forgive you." From that moment, the house turned hostile. Doors slammed on their own, mirrors cracked. Eleanor woke to scratches on her arms, shaped like words. "Leave him." Thomas grew weaker by the day, his skin pale, his eyes hollow. He claimed Lillian was visiting him at night, pulling him into her embrace, whispering promises of forever. Eleanor begged him to fight it, but he only smiled dreamily. She loves me more than you ever could." Desperate, Eleanor turned to the town's oldest records. She discovered that Lillian Harper had indeed lived in their home. She had fallen in love with a professor, and when he refused to leave his wife, Lillian slit her wrists in the rose garden behind the house. The roses grew blood-red every spring, nourished by her death. Eleanor realized the truth. Lillian wasn't just haunting Thomas. She was trying to finish what she started, stealing a man from his wife, binding him to her forever. On the final night, Eleanor awoke to find Thomas gone. She followed the scent of roses into the backyard. There, beneath the moonlight, she saw him standing in the garden, a knife in his hand. "Lillian says if I give her my blood, we'll be together," he whispered, smiling through tears. Eleanor screamed and rushed to stop him, but before she could reach him, cold hands wrapped around her wrists. She turned and saw her. Lillian, pale and beautiful, her dress soaked in crimson, her eyes black voids of hunger. "He was never yours," Lillian hissed, "and soon he will be mine forever." The knife plunged. Thomas collapsed among the roses, his blood seeping into the soil. Lillian vanished, but her laughter lingered in the night air. Eleanor fell to her knees, cradling her husband's body. The roses swayed gently, their petals dripping with crimson dew. The police ruled it a suicide. The neighbors whispered about depression, about stress. But Eleanor knew the truth. The roses bloomed brighter than ever that spring, their scent choking the air with sweetness and rot. And sometimes, late at night, Eleanor swears she still receives crimson letters. They arrive without footsteps, without delivery. Always signed the same way. "Forever, L." Michael Turner believed his wife Claire was the very definition of grace. They had met at a masquerade ball in New Orleans, both wearing masks that concealed their true selves. For Michael, it had been love at first sight. Claire, in her silver gown, her delicate laughter, her eyes that seemed to pierce through his soul even though half her face was hidden. They married within a year, and Michael thought their love story was straight from a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as he would learn, often end in blood. The first sign of betrayal was subtle. Claire began to work late, her career as a gallery curator demanding more hours. Michael trusted her, until one night when she stumbled home with lipstick on her neck, lipstick that wasn't hers. She brushed it off, saying it was a smudge from hugging a friend. Michael wanted to believe her, but suspicion gnawed at him. The second sign came when Michael found a mask, an ornate black mask with crimson feathers hidden in the back of Claire's closet. It wasn't hers. He knew every piece of clothing she owned. The mask carried a faint scent of cologne. His hands trembled as he held it, memories of their masquerade meeting flooding his mind. One night, he decided to follow her. Claire dressed in a crimson gown and left the house, unaware that Michael was a shadow trailing behind. She drove to an abandoned theater on the outskirts of town, its decaying sign barely legible in the moonlight. Michael parked a block away and crept closer, his heart pounding. Through a cracked window, he saw candlelight flickering inside. He peered in and froze. Claire was not alone. She stood on stage, her crimson gown glowing in the candlelight, her face hidden behind a mask of silver. Around her, masked figures in black cloaks gathered in a circle. They chanted in low voices, their words too muffled to make out. Claire lifted her hands, and the figures bowed as if she were their queen. And then Michael saw him, the man in the ornate black mask with crimson feathers. He stepped forward, and Claire embraced him. Their kiss was long, lingering, filled with passion. Michael's stomach turned to ice. His wife wasn't just cheating. She was leading some kind of secret ritual with a masked lover who seemed to hold as much power as she did. Michael stumbled back, his breath shallow. He wanted to run, to confront her, to do anything but stand frozen in disbelief. But then he saw something that made his blood run cold. The man in the black mask turned his head toward the window, though Michael couldn't see his face. He felt the man's gaze pierce him. Slowly, the masked man lifted a hand and pointed directly at him. The cloaked figures stopped chanting. Claire's masked face turned toward the window. Michael ran. He didn't stop until he reached home, his lungs burning. He locked every door, every window, and waited. Hours passed. Finally, Claire returned. She slipped into bed beside him, smelling faintly of roses and smoke, as though nothing had happened. Michael said nothing. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but fear silenced him. Over the next few weeks, the house grew strange. Michael found black feathers on the floor, even though they owned no birds. At night, he heard muffled chanting outside the windows. Sometimes, he woke to find Claire standing over him in the dark, still wearing her silver mask. She never spoke, only stared until he pretended to fall asleep again. One evening, Michael finally confronted her. "I followed you," he whispered. "I saw what you're doing. I saw him." Claire's expression didn't falter. Slowly, she smiled. "You weren't supposed to see," she said softly. "But now you can't unsee it." "Who are they?" Michael demanded. "Who is he?" Claire tilted her head. "He is everything you're not. Power, passion, immortality. He gives me what you never could." Michael's chest ached. "You're cheating on me. With him." Claire laughed gently, shaking her head. "Cheating? No, Michael. This isn't betrayal. This is evolution. I've chosen the mask over the man." Her words haunted him. That night, Michael dreamt of masked figures surrounding his bed. He woke to find feathers on his chest, as if the dream had bled into reality. The smell of roses lingered in the air. Days blurred into nights. Michael grew paranoid, watching Claire slip out of the house, always returning with a glow in her eyes that had nothing to do with him. He began to fear the masked man more than anything else. Sometimes, Michael swore he saw him standing in the shadows across the street, always watching, always waiting. Finally, Michael decided he couldn't take it anymore. He followed Claire again. This time, the ritual was different. The cloaked figures held candles, forming a circle around a large mirror. Claire and the masked man stood hand in hand before it. Michael crouched low, peering through the broken window. Claire removed her mask, revealing a face more radiant than Michael had ever seen. But when the masked man removed his, Michael nearly screamed. It was his face. The man in the black mask looked exactly like Michael, down to the last detail, except for his eyes, which glowed crimson. Michael stumbled backward, his breath ragged. He didn't understand. Was it a doppelganger? A demon wearing his image? Inside the theater, Claire kissed the masked Michael passionately. The chanting grew louder, echoing like thunder. The mirror shimmered, and Michael saw his reflection staring back at him, except it wasn't a reflection. It was the masked version of him, grinning wickedly. The glass cracked, and then the masked Michael stepped through. The real Michael screamed as the figure reached for him, but the cloaked followers dragged him inside the theater. Claire watched with cold eyes, her hand resting gently in the doppelganger's. "You were only ever the mask," she whispered. The last thing Michael saw before the world went dark was his wife's smile as she turned to her new husband, an imitation of him, perfected, powerful, eternal. The next morning, neighbors swore they saw Michael leaving the house with Claire, hand in hand, but those who looked closely noticed his eyes were no longer his own. They glowed faintly red. And Claire, she wore her silver mask everywhere now, because some betrayals don't just break hearts, they replace souls. Daniel and his wife, Sophia, had always dreamed of owning an old Victorian home. When they stumbled across a sprawling mansion on the edge of a sleepy coastal town, they thought fate had smiled on them. The locals whispered about its tragic past. Families that moved in and quickly left, rumors of strange shadows and voices. But Daniel brushed it off. He was a man of logic, and Sophia was a woman of charm. Together, they thought they could turn any haunted relic into a home. The first few months were blissful. The house groaned with age, its walls humming at night like it was breathing. Sophia filled the rooms with laughter and music, and Daniel believed they had brought new life into a place long forgotten. But then things changed. Sophia began spending long hours in the attic. She said she was cataloging old journals and artifacts left behind by previous owners. Daniel believed her, until one night he crept up and found her whispering into the walls, her hands pressed against the peeling wallpaper as though she were stroking skin. He called her name, and she turned, startled. Her eyes were wild, pupils dilated, cheeks flushed. "The house is telling me its secrets," she whispered. Daniel laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but Sophia wasn't smiling. Soon she grew distant. At night she locked the bedroom door, claiming she needed space. Daniel heard her footsteps pacing through the halls, sometimes stopping outside his door. Other times, he woke to muffled laughter in the walls. It wasn't just Sophia's laughter. One evening, Daniel returned from work early. He expected to find Sophia in the kitchen or reading in the parlor. Instead, he heard faint moans from the upstairs study. His stomach tightened. Slowly, he climbed the staircase, every step heavy with dread. The door to the study was cracked open. He pushed it wider and froze. Sophia wasn't alone. She stood before the wall, her dress half undone, her lips pressed against the peeling wallpaper. Her body writhed against the plaster as if embracing a lover. The sound of whispering filled the room. Male whispers, low and guttural, rising from the very bones of the house. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Sophia," he croaked. She turned to him, her lips red, her eyes glazed. "He loves me," she said. "The house loves me in ways you never could." Daniel stumbled backward, bile rising in his throat. His wife wasn't just betraying him, she was betraying him with the house itself. That night he tried to confront her. "You're losing your mind," he insisted. "This place is poisoning you." But Sophia only smiled. "He chose me. The house chose me. And soon it will choose you too, if you surrender." Daniel refused. He began sleeping in the guest room, though the whispers never left him. At night, he swore he felt fingers brushing across his skin, as if the wallpaper itself was reaching for him. Sometimes, the walls pulsed like veins beneath the plaster. One stormy evening, Daniel decided he couldn't take it anymore. He packed a bag, determined to leave and drag Sophia with him if necessary. But when he entered the bedroom, she was gone. Panic surged through him. He searched the halls, the attic, the basement. Finally, he heard her voice, soft, moaning, loving, from behind the study wall. He pressed his ear against the plaster. The whispers were louder now, layered with her voice, her laughter, her sighs. Daniel slammed his fists against the wall, shouting her name. The plaster cracked, and with one desperate blow, he tore through. What he saw will never leave him. Sophia was inside the wall, her body entwined with something that wasn't human. The house had grown hands, arms, faces, grotesque shapes pressed against her, kissing her, pulling her deeper. She looked at Daniel, her eyes filled with ecstasy. "He loves me more than you ever could," she whispered. "He promised me eternity." Daniel screamed and tried to drag her out, but the wall sealed shut around her. Her face was the last to vanish, smiling even as the plaster swallowed her whole. Days passed. Daniel roamed the empty house, hollow and broken. But the house wasn't silent. At night, he heard Sophia's voice in the walls, calling his name, begging him to join her. Sometimes he saw her silhouette pressed against the wallpaper, her lips moving as though she were kissing from the other side. The betrayal cut deeper than any affair. His wife had chosen the house over him. One night, Daniel gave in. He pressed his lips against the wall, whispering her name. The plaster was warm, pulsing like living skin, and when the whispers answered back, he didn't resist. The next morning, the mansion stood silent once more. Neighbors passing by noticed the windows shuttered, the garden overgrown. No one saw Daniel or Sophia again, but at night, if you stood close enough, you could hear moans and whispers through the walls. The house had found its lovers, and it was never letting them go. Ethan and Clara had been married for nearly 12 years. Their relationship had seen its fair share of storms, financial struggles, family conflicts, and moments of doubt. But Ethan always believed they could weather anything together. Clara was his anchor, his first love, the woman he'd sworn to protect and cherish. But love, he would learn, can be a mask. And sometimes, betrayal wears the face you trust most. It began subtly. Clara grew distant. She lingered on her phone late into the night, her fingers typing furiously while Ethan lay in bed beside her, pretending not to notice. She started leaving the house for errands that stretched into hours. When Ethan asked, she offered vague excuses. Grocery trips, a friend in need, long walks to clear her mind. Ethan wanted to believe her, but doubt is a disease, and once it infects the heart, it spreads. One night, he couldn't resist temptation. As Clara showered, Ethan picked up her phone. His hands trembled as he scrolled through her messages. That's when he found them. Dozens of texts exchanged with a man saved under the name S. The words were intimate, raw, filled with longing. Can't wait to feel you again. He'll never know. You're the only one who makes me alive. Ethan's chest tightened. His worst fears had been true all along. His wife, the woman he trusted more than anyone, was betraying him. He wanted to confront her right then, but rage boiled over reason. Instead, he set the phone down, his mind spiraling. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He replayed their years together in his head. Every smile, every kiss, every promise, now tainted by lies. The next evening, Ethan followed Clara. She claimed she was visiting her sister, but he trailed her car through the winding streets. She didn't stop at her sister's house. She drove instead to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Ethan parked far away and crept closer, hiding in the shadows. What he saw through the cracked windows chilled him. Clara wasn't meeting just one man. She was in the center of a circle. 5 men, strangers whose faces Ethan didn't recognize. They surrounded her, whispering in low, guttural voices. Clara stood with her head bowed, murmuring words that weren't hers. A strange symbol was drawn in chalk. On the floor, a circle lined with jagged shapes that glowed faintly in the dark. It wasn't just betrayal. It was ritual. Ethan pressed his hand over his mouth, silencing his gasp. He watched in horror as Clara lifted her hands, her voice changing, becoming deeper, harsher, as though something else spoke through her. The men bowed before her, and then, as though in worship, they began to chant. The air grew heavy, the circle glowed brighter. Clara's body arched unnaturally, her eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. Ethan's heart pounded. He stumbled back, but his foot kicked a loose stone. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silence. The chanting stopped. Clara's head snapped toward the window, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "Ethan," she hissed, though her lips hadn't moved. The voice wasn't hers. He fled, racing through the night until he reached home. His chest heaved, his mind reeling. Who were those men? What had his wife become? When Clara returned later, she acted as though nothing had happened. She kissed his cheek, smiled, and asked about his day. Ethan forced a nod, but inside, terror gnawed at him. He barely slept, knowing the woman lying beside him was no longer the same Clara he once loved. The next morning, Ethan awoke to find his phone buzzing. A new message flashed across the screen. It wasn't from Clara. It was from an unknown number. She chose them over you, and soon she'll choose the darkness too. Ethan's blood turned cold. He deleted the message, but more followed, each one darker than the last. She's not your wife anymore. She belongs to us now. Join us, or die alone. He tried to confront Clara, but she only tilted her head and smiled. You shouldn't go through my phone, she whispered. It makes you look paranoid. Ethan realized then that she knew. She knew he had discovered everything, and she didn't care. Over the following days, the messages grew stranger. They began appearing on his laptop, his work computer, even scribbled on scraps of paper tucked under his pillow. Sometimes the messages weren't written in English at all, but in symbols that twisted his stomach when he stared at them too long. And then, one night, he received the final message. Midnight. The warehouse. Come if you want the truth. Against every instinct, Ethan went. He told himself he needed closure, needed to know what Clara had become. The warehouse loomed in the dark, like a gaping mouth. Inside, the circle was drawn again, brighter this time, burning into the concrete floor. Clara stood in the center, her body trembling as if something inside her was trying to break free. The men surrounded her, chanting, their voices low and relentless. When Ethan stepped forward, Clara's head snapped toward him. For a moment, her eyes softened, her real self flickering through. Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling. Help me. But then it was gone. Her eyes rolled back, her mouth twisted into a grin too wide, too sharp. You shouldn't have come, the voice inside her said. She's ours now. The men closed in, and Ethan realized too late the trap he had walked into. They weren't trying to keep him away. They wanted him there. The circle flared, blinding light flooding the room. Ethan screamed as hands, clawed, burning hands, shot from the ground and dragged him inside. Clara watched, half crying, half smiling, her body torn between the woman he loved and the darkness that consumed her. His last memory was of her voice, soft, broken, and filled with sorrow. I'm sorry. When the light faded, the warehouse was empty. No circle, no men, no Clara. Only silence. Weeks later, police found Ethan's car abandoned nearby. Clara was never seen again. Some say she ran away with her lover. Others whisper she joined a cult. But those who know the truth never speak of it. Because at midnight, if you stand near the old warehouse, your phone might buzz with a message. She chose the darkness. Will you? And if you answer, you'll never be seen again.